Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
Yeah, I'm Ben Matlock. Hi.
Are you sure?
I'm Ben Matlock.
You sound a little like you were questioning that. You're like,
I'm big Poppy Ben Matlock.
Ben Rain Man Matlock.
Big Ben. Here.
5 minutes to Wapner. I think they say that in the movie. I've never actually seen Rain Man. I've just seen a bunch of parodies of Rain Man.
Yeah,
but
I've never seen it either. But I'm sure it's based off me.
Thought it was about Al Roker.
That's The Weatherman with Nicolas Cage, where Nicolas Cage plays Al Roker.
So anyway, welcome back. If you've not listened to the show before, it's
hell.
Really just random stuff. Yeah.
It's hell on earth.
Pretty much.
You're not all going to be here by the end.
We bring random stuff each week. Sometimes it's like true story or histories or ghost stories or urban legends or creepypasta. There's really no, it's like that cliche thing, like the first rule is there are no rules.
Yeah. It's funny because this is the most formatted show we probably could have done, and there's no format. So
it's a show about nothing.
Between the two of us, this is the most format we're capable of doing.
And I was just thinking today, as I was putting my stuff together, I'm like, God, this is too much format. I was almost like, I was pining for the days when we had the video game podcast where you had to do zero research. You just sat and talked about what you were playing or what was going on Twitter at that particular moment.
It was a very mind vomit type of show, and now it's we have to stick to the topic, but we don't. We've gotten worse and worse.
Every other week I have to put an hour of work into making notes, and that's just way too much.
Every time I edit it, I'm as I said, more and more, we had episode 100, and now it's every week, I'm shit, do I need to cut this 20 minutes out? Because I have no idea how we...
Yeah.
I have no idea how we got here.
Shows yes, please cut that out.
But I don't, because that's usually where the good shit is.
Yeah.
By good shit, I mean the stuff I laugh at.
That's what I always liked about our show is it was the kind that we can record it, you edit it, so you're listening to it, and then I listen to it when it comes through at the end, and I can still it's only been a couple days since we recorded, and it's this is kind of funny.
I thought Ben's a funny guy.
It's like I say on Twitter all the time, we might not entertain anybody else, but as long as I entertain myself, it's that's a win.
There's nothing more cringy. It's cringy and crazy. No. There's nothing more cringy but more genuine to me than when I'm laughing at my own shit. I'm embarrassed, but it's also it's a genuine, I understand how much of an asshole I look like.
Yeah,
but that means I know I hit something funny if I still have to laugh at it.
But isn't that the funny thing? Because if I listen to it and I'll laugh about it and be yeah, that was funny. And I know you've got people too, where I'll be talking to somebody that I forget listens to the show, and they're oh yeah, that episode last week is oh shit, somebody listened to that?
We don't talk about last week's episode.
It's weird that I get the good reaction from myself, and then the idea of somebody else listening to it is no, oh, that's embarrassing. But
yeah, I don't really.
That's the life of a creator, I guess.
I think all my friends who've listened to it, they kind of know that to leave it in the past. I don't because I actually will kind of, after I edit it, I just sort of a torture victim or something. It goes out of my mind, and they'll be no, you remember last week's show? It's I don't even remember the topic, let alone what I said during it.
That came up on Twitter today because we're getting to the point now where I'll hear topics and I don't remember if we've covered them or if I maybe looked into them as a possible topic at some point, or if I just heard about them somewhere else. And
because you were on Twitter, you asked me hey, did you talk about this old Chinese
pirate lady,
pirate lord? And I had talked about a Chinese pirate lord back in episode 3, but like, even if I had talked about her, like, the most research you're going to get from me is I will go to our website and I will type in pirate into the search bar.
Yeah,
and,
that's what I did
see
too.
And see what episodes come up, and then I'll confidently be like, no. and if I'm wrong, then that's on you because you write the descriptions.
Yeah.
So
I know, and I did a really terrible job of that for like the first half of our season, so it makes it a lot harder to quickly search. Well, the descriptions are usually okay if you use a search feature. If you're just looking through the episode titles, I used to like think I was being clever and witty, and I would like come up with clever, witty titles. And now looking back, you're like, what the fuck does that mean? Like,
I have great titles, but they're on the raw MP3 file. Anyway, yeah. So
yeah, I did get something this week. So yeah, so we do.
Steve's got a story. So everybody,
settle round, kiddies. Let me tell you a tale. So William Chaloner was born sometime in the late half of the 1650s.
Sorry. I want to start, like, I really think we need to go back from episode 1 and just do a count of how many episodes start with you awkwardly trying to get the name out.
Yeah, well, and I almost made mention, I used William Chaloner or Saloner. I have no idea how it's pronounced.
The loner.
I wrote his last name at the very first word, or with technically second word. And then I don't think I use his last name again until almost the end of it. I'm like, he's just William. Yeah. Like, at least it's William's easy.
Yeah. I mean, that's how you write anything. You write essays or whatever. You don't go with the name that you struggle with, or it might just be long to type. We're calling him Bill now.
Bill, yeah. So Billy, old Bill, was born in the late 1650s sometime. And he grew up in Warwickshire, England. But he was a free-spirited, which means he's a pain-in-the-ass child, and never showed much interest in it or ability in following his father's footsteps as a weaver, which I don't particularly blame him.
What an asshole. He didn't want to...
Son, we've had a long tradition of making rugs in this family, but I don't like rugs, Dad.
The Shalomers make rugs, and that's not changing with you son of a bitch.
I'm going on the Red Bull Extreme Sports Tour.
You little fucker. Get back here and crochet.
Sure. So basically that's what they did, the military school equivalency, and they sent him to the town of Birmingham to apprentice as a nail maker, so blacksmithery basically. Yeah. But Birmingham...
You're going to be boring, goddammit, go.
Fine, you want some fancy smithing job? Rugsmith isn't good enough for you? What if you're a blacksmith then? And the kid was like, I'll give it a shot.
It's like weaving with metal, now go.
Go. And of course they had to send him to this other town because Birmingham was the center of blacksmithing. So apparently Warwickshire was the center of weaving. It is weird, but it's true that they used to live in a world where every town was defined by the one trade that it could do.
So imagine where he grew up is the Shire from Lord of the Rings. And then they send him off to go where the orcs were building all their fucking black metal shit.
Yeah, but you can't start with suits of armor and swords and stuff. They're you're going to start with nails.
You're going to start with the toughest toothpick.
Of course, being the center of blacksmithing, Birmingham was also a major source of counterfeiting coins.
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah. So, of course, that's what William preferred to do instead of making nails by hand. It's I could make money or I could make money.
Yeah. I can...
So he learned to make fake or counterfeit groats, which they were called, which I think is a great name for coins. It's how much is this cola? And 8 groats. Okay, that seems a little stiff, Dick. But
come down a couple groats, you fucking asshole.
When I was a kid, it was only 10 groats. Oh, that's more. I went the wrong way.
If you're not willing to fucking barter your groats, then what are we even groating each other for?
Well, that's where the phrase, everybody is pretty familiar with the American idiom, barter your groats. It's like, come on, Bill, barter your groats.
Come down a couple groats. I can't pay you full price. I can't look myself in the mirror.
And of course, we all know that a groat was a silver coin with relatively simple markings, which made it an easy thing for people to forge, which is why that was
a silver coin with groat written on it.
Yeah, I mean, to be more specific, it used silver, but not pure silver, which is why it was really easy to use just like iron or something instead, because whatever. It was it was like the simplest currency to forge, so they made a lot of it there in Birmingham. Tisk tisk. But eventually, William made his way to London, because like every kid, you want to live in the big city, not some two-groat town. Where he did
his trade, and now he's going off to apply it, counting cards in Vegas.
And he tried. I mean, he went to London seeking more honest work as a blacksmith. Unfortunately for him and many others, that trade was nearly impossible to get into from the outside, thanks to the strong workers' guilds, so basically the unions of the time. I guess not really unions, because it wasn't looking out for the workers. It was just making sure other people couldn't get in on your... Yeah, basically. So, unable to actually become like a blacksmith in London, he instead fell back on less savory professions. So, like many stories that you come across, if they're giving just like a rundown of William's life, he's just listed as a forger, a very famous forger, and we'll get to that, of course. But that's doing a huge disservice to him because it ignores a whole bunch of other seedy things that he was in. For example, shortly after moving to London, he began producing and selling tin watches. What's weird about that? It's that these tin watches were built to secretly house dildos.
Hell yeah, dude.
Right.
This guy's awesome.
Which apparently this was like a fad, like a not necessarily above ground or, a very frowned upon industry that came out of Italy. But I'm not sure what kind of watch is big enough to house a dildo.
It's like a slinky dildo that just springs open from the watch.
Like a cuckoo clock.
Yeah, so when exactly. And when a cop tries to arrest you, you can thwap him in the face with it, and
you're talking to somebody, and you're like, "Oh, excuse me, I'll be right back. It's almost the start of a new hour."
Oh, would you look at that, officer? My clock has stopped. Thwong.
Like I said, I don't know what watches they're talking about, but one thing's for certain is that I'll never look at Flava Flav and his giant clock necklace quite the same. Now I'm kind of wondering.
I mean, it's not telling us anything that we didn't already know.
Part of me hopes that's exactly what it is. Like the average 1600s Londoner had a Flava Flav clock hanging around their neck with dildos inside them.
Just a giant spring-loaded cock.
Yeah.
Ready to unleash its fury upon the town.
I gotta go. I gotta wind my pocket watch. Wink, wink.
I love the idea of somebody, there's no, sexual attachment to it. He just has this, spring-loaded cock. And he's just, he feels powerful with it. It's a weapon in his mind.
I was trying to come up with, a Rolex pun, but I can't.
This is more valuable than a Rolex to me.
Maybe that's why those, I remember when I was in school, the big thing were Iron Man watches. Maybe that's where the name came. I thought it was the triathlon that they were named after, but anyway, he also made money as a fortune teller and by selling quack medicine and elixirs and just generally being a very, talented, smooth talking con man. He was Henry Hill from that thing that Henry Hill was in, The Music Man. That'd be the name of it. He would also make a lot of money helping victims recover stolen items for a fee, of course. So Private Detective.
Private Dick. Bringing a whole new name to Private Dick.
And if you think he was successful at that, if you think he was able to become successful at that just because he was actually in cahoots with the people who stole the items in the first place, you'd be absolutely correct. So basically he'd team up with thieves and say, hey, steal this and we'll sell it back and I'll split the money with you.
Look, the economy has to keep going, you know? We were talking about that off air. It's a cycle.
And the pawn industry was born. Like most people working these kinds of like cons and illegal trades, William had a number of run-ins with the law, but he was always able to like weasel his way out of them. Usually with his like smooth talking, or he had his back covered through various means. Or like there was one time when he was linked to a burglary and they came after him. He had this really like unique, smooth, cunning technique of just leaving town, which meant also abandoning his wife and children forever. So that was pretty smooth. Writing that, I probably didn't portray it well enough just now. It's like this guy is portrayed as this like really crafty for his time, smart con man. And it's like, yeah, and he was almost caught, so he just left his wife and kids.
And he always had a foolproof escape plan in his back pocket, which is put on a fake mustache and abandon everything you know and love.
Yeah, he moved to Scotland for a while and just never contacted his wife or kids again. It's like, well, it worked. Hey. He didn't go to jail.
Look, you knew what kind of guy you were marrying. A fucking fake watch dildo guy.
Hey, that's the thing. She only married him for the watch dildos anyway. It wasn't love.
Yeah.
So after
it's a type of love.
Well, yeah.
A love of the craft.
That's the craft. After that particular setback or set forward, depending on how he felt about his wife and kid, like that might have just been a bonus. He became a Japaner, which was the actual term used to describe people who made cheap knockoffs of increasingly popular and expensive imported furniture from Asia or Japan. You know, they just kind of lumped that area in together. Which is good, because when I first saw the word Japaner, I'm like, oh shit, this guy's going to start like trading Japanese slaves or something.
That was the thing. I was like, it took me a moment, because I have heard that term before, but it took me a moment to be like, that's not just like some horrible fucking racial.
It probably did become like but that's what they called that profession. It wasn't actually a race thing as much as, I mean, you could say cultural appropriation or whatever, but it was more forgery than anything. It wasn't even like they were trying to say, this is like, we're taking your culture and making it ours. We're pretending to sell your stuff because it's expensive. So, but it didn't make a whole lot of money. So he once again explored different business options, and what better move than to go back to the thing that kicked off your career, counterfeiting coins, which was definitely a more profitable crime, and William was really good at it. Like, not just good at getting away with it, but he was he forged very convincing coins. He was good at making, these coins. The only real downside...
They should hire him to make real coins.
Coins, yeah.
Apparently he's good at it.
The only real downside to going back into this particular line of business is that in London at the time, well, just in England in general, I guess, counterfeiting money was considered treason, and thus those found guilty of it were hung. Or, if you were a woman and you were spared the gallows, they didn't want to hang women, because of course they'd rather burn them at the stake. And as a completely weird side note, this has nothing to do with the story, but it was a footnote in one of my sources. Apparently at the time, being burned at the stake was like the default punishment for women, like criminals. Like, not like, oh, you jaywalked, we're going to burn you at the stake, but really relatively minor, like, crimes. Anything that they deemed capital offenses, which was a big, broad definition for women, was to burn them at the stake. But as a really stupid acknowledgement of how barbaric that was, they would tie a rope around the woman's neck so that once the flames began to reach her, they could humanely strangle her to death. So basically, they'd like symbolically burn her. Well, I mean, they'd literally burn her at the stake.
But they would also choke her
But they'd be
out.
like, but that's a shitty way to die, so we'll just strangle you first. However, because rope is flammable, the rope would usually burn before that could happen, so the victim would still end up being burned alive. And so they it's that weird thing society does where they're like, yeah, okay, we get it. Burning at the stake's barbaric. What if we promise to try to make it humane? I hope that didn't work. Let's keep doing it though. Like,
and after the first hanging that is like that is the easier way to die. Like, for sure.
That's the thing. That's what
even
makes
if it doesn't break your neck, like, I'd rather be choked out than burnt to death.
Well, yeah. And they know that, and that's what the thing, and it's like, not to try to be like the woke cast or anything, but I mean, it's clearly like the most chauvinistic, like, for no reason either. It's like, oh, but if a woman does it, we got to make sure she dies painfully and horrendously.
I hope we hear from the one person who's like, fucking SJWs think women shouldn't be burnt at the stake. It's like, please write that email. Fucking these woke bastards. They were good once, but then they were like,
yeah.
They're like,
I mean, in fact, Steve has unintentionally said a number of terrible things. Like, I was really thinking he was one of us, but man, women shouldn't be burned. It's just a step too far, man.
I'm out. Yeah, there's always like any show has that, like, really out of nowhere, like, I'm out. The moment you said that men and women should both be hung, I'm out.
You know what my honest to God reaction to that would be is like, someone was in? Like,
yeah, I'd laugh at him and be like, haha, took your time. And you don't get it back, no refunds. This ain't Steam, bitch.
Like 164 episodes that some of them run into the 2-hour mark. Like, ha ha ha, joke's on you.
We're taking a little bit of your life, one fucking topic at a time.
Anyway, for the most part, William was able to avoid risking death by gallows simply by employing the use of, like, criminal middleman, basically. That way, when somebody was caught... Yeah.
Of, like, old-timey counterfeit money.
Yeah, instead of meth. That way, when someone was caught trying to pass the forged currency, they'd be the one that was hanged. And of course, anytime that those convicted tried to point the finger back at William, he was able to, like, talk his way out of it. Like, I don't know what this guy's talking about. Like, I've never met him before in my life. So, like any good entrepreneur, once William's counterfeiting operation was stable and lucrative, he began exploring other ways of making money. His next con was probably even more, like, morally, like, centered and good. But it focused on the fact that the British government was increasingly, like, seeing the dangers of support from the Jacobites, which we all know were people that were loyal to Charles Stuart, son of the previous English king, who was trying to reclaim his right to the throne.
Yeah.
So if my stumbling through that confused you, basically your typical English monarch history where there had been a king, he died, instead of his son becoming king, somebody else became king, and eventually
they didn't have the Premier League back then.
Right,
so
right. He got
this
relegated.
Was how you got.
Yeah.
This is you picked your team this way.
Right. So then there was a number of people that were in support and say, hey, this other guy should be king, and of course the current king can't have that. So yeah, basically it was your typical, like, hey, these people are seen as rebels and they're the enemies. So anyway, the king saw Jacobites as enemies. William saw them as a lucrative business opportunity. He'd he'd use his printing and his equipment that he had amassed through his wealth of coin counterfeiting, and he'd print up, like, pamphlets that were, like, pro, Jacobite, pro King Stuart or whatever. And he'd hand them out to Jacobite supporters, and, basically he'd trick them to coming into town and be like, oh, here's some literature and we're going to, protest this and I support you. And as soon as they all had these, like, pamphlets in hand, he'd call the authorities and be like, hey, look, I found a bunch of dissidents, and they'd arrest and execute them all and give him a big reward for turning them in.
You see the same technique in sports forums today, where somebody will jump onto, like, a Cowboys website and they're an Eagles fan, but they'll pretend to be a Cowboys fan just long enough to, like, post, like, some disturbing, like, goatsy pic or some shit.
You speak like you've seen this in firsthand.
As, well, there is a legend of one Eagles fan doing something like that.
I'll keep my eye out if I ever meet an Eagles fan. I don't know of any offhand.
There are not too many left. They've all gone into hiding. But anyway.
So as you can imagine, throwing your, like, counterfeit coin sellers under the bus anytime they got caught, and a lot of them got caught, And also framing and ratting out political dissidents tends to make an enemy or two. Like, there were plenty of people that did not particularly like William.
I was going to say, this is, the one thing I was going to give this guy is like all the criminal enterprises he got into up to this point. This seems like the most short-sighted one. Yeah.
This is where you can see he was starting to just get too egotistical, like I'm too big to fail, like I'm too smart, this will never catch up with me. And if you've listened to our show before, you know where this is going.
25 minutes in, it caught up to him.
So yeah, there was a lot of, and the funny thing is, the people that you're pissing off are also ones that know exactly what illegal thing you're doing because they're part of it.
Right.
But at the time, because he had made a bunch of money doing this, it was that gross class thing where it's like, some thief on the street gets caught with a counterfeit coin and he tries to accuse this wealthy townsperson. Yeah, it was really easy. Like, I think the more I read about him, the less I think it had to do with him being this like suave, like manipulative, cunning con man. And it was just like I'm rich, you can't prove it. And everybody's like, yeah, ha ha ha, he's rich.
Yeah, after a while, like, you don't need charisma. Like, your hoard of wealth will bury you from a lot of consequences.
So anyway, at some point, William, with the help of a thief named Coppinger, wrote a pro-Jacobite satire, which they planned to use as bait to catch and turn in more Jacobites or whatever. It confuses me because it's like Jacobites, but the guy's name was like Charles Stewart. It's like, maybe his middle name was Jacob. I don't know.
It was his favorite snack, Jacobites.
Yeah. But here's the other thing, is when you tend to like partner up with criminals, they tend to also be criminals. It's weird. So Coppinger sensed an opportunity to, instead of, doing this plan and splitting the reward money, he thought, maybe I can take the whole reward money for myself. Mm-hmm. So in addition to catching the political criminals, Coppinger double-crossed William and gave away his forgery business. So basically, while they're turning these, they're like, hey, look, here's some Jacobites. And by the way, he's making fake money. And, theoretically surprising the shit out of William.
Yeah. That's always the turning point in any, like, criminal movie is, like, it's the perfect crime, except one asshole wants more than what should be enough.
Yeah, so Coppinger got all the money and lived... No, actually, this isn't quite the turning point yet, because unfortunately for Coppinger, William was the better con man, i.e. he had more money, I think, and better standing.
and he managed... he did it.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing. He was able to hide the forging business, so they couldn't convict him on that. In addition to that, he knew that Coppinger had helped write this pro-Jacobite satire, so he said, by the way, here's the guy that wrote this book. And so Coppinger was arrested and hung. Touche.
Again, short-sighted play. Fucking over
that's the thing.
Trying to fuck over your partner.
Yeah, one person's going to get screwed, but you don't know who.
Yeah.
And both of them are like, I've got the upper hand. And then in the end, the one with the actual upper hand's just like, ha.
Yeah. It's like literally, the upper hand is the good metaphor here because it is like a poker match where it's like, I have a pair of kings. Well, I have a pair of aces. And it's like, fuck.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, that this guy thought he had William dead to rights and was going to make a quick buck. And then when it turned around on him, he's just like, shit.
That is actually a very true representation of me playing poker. Where there's no poker face to it. It's like, fuck, son of a bitch. It doesn't take much to tilt me.
And I can't help but picture the amount of times in William's life that somebody had to be drug away by the authorities, like screaming, "You're gonna fucking pay for this, William! Yeah. You're gonna get yours!" And then they get hung, and William doesn't get his, and he's like, "Ha ha." So near the end of the 1600s, William would try to take his coin forging business and make it legitimate. England, if you can believe it or not, was having a lot of problems with their currency being too easy to replicate. A fact that William was, of course, very well aware of.
Right.
So he's caused this problem. There was other forgers too, but
it's like how hackers and stuff will go work for Microsoft
Exactly.
To, like, shore up their security.
It is exactly that. That's why he began campaigning to be made the official government mint. It's same as like the U.S. now. There's like the U.S. Mint, which is technically like a company. I think it's considered a government entity, but they're the ones with the contract to make the money. And that's what he was going. There was somebody else making the official currency, and he's like, look, make me the official currency maker, and here's all these things I can do to the currency to make it harder to replicate. He did have the support of a recently replaced Lord of the Treasury, so the person that would be in control of this stuff, the Earl of Monmouth. Of course, we all knew that. Mm-hmm. The Earl had recently lost his job because so many fucking people were making fake money. And when William's like, hey, make me the head mint, guy. Of course, the old guy, it was like that episode of Simpsons with the beer baron where Wiggum lost his job and then he's like teaming up with Homer to get his job back. So it's exactly that. There was even the catapults, if you're familiar with the episode. Unfortunately, in order for William to like make this move to try to become legitimate, he had to do two things. First, he had to give up his secrets on how to fix the currency. Like you said, I can fix it. Look, you just do this, this, and this, and it's harder to replicate. And second, he basically had to admit that he's been forging coin. He didn't outright be like, look, I've been doing this for years. But when you come out and say, this is why it's easy to do everything
under the pretense of, well, a guy I knew did it like this.
Right. So that first part is what probably prevented him from actually becoming the official mint, as the new Lord of the Treasury wasn't a fucking idiot. And it's like, oh, that's how you make it harder to replicate. Let's just do that with our existing, setup. So basically they just took his ideas. And although the second part wouldn't immediately land him in any trouble, it did like put a whole bunch of attention on him from the government and the Treasury Department and all that stuff. Because like I said, he didn't outright say it, but they're like, wait a minute, something's up here.
You know an awful lot about murder, sir.
Yep. So those tasked with investigating such things turned their attentions to him. Which at the time, the like, I don't know their terms over there because this is 1600s England, but it'd be like the FBI basically, but like I assume the U.S. Treasury Department has their own like investigative branch for this stuff too. So it'd be like that. It's like the investigative branch of the British Treasury. It's like, hey, we should probably look into this guy. And the head of that branch at the time was a man by the name of Sir Isaac Newton. That guy.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So that's when the real problem started, because when you've made it so far because people are like, you're a pretty smart cookie. And it's like, yeah, well, now Isaac Newton's after you. It's like, well, fuck.
That's not fair.
Right. Not only did he discover gravity, but he made some really good cookies himself. They got the fig stuff in them and whatever. So while Newton began working to build a case against William, the invention of paper money kind of helped drive William's business forward even more. Is right at this time is when they first introduced paper, bills, dollar bills, basically, into the British currency system, which William was very easily able to replicate because he already had all the printing stuff from his other cons. Excuse me. Though he was pretty quickly caught, he benefited from the fact that since paper money was so new, there weren't actually any laws against forging paper money. So it's like, haha, you did this. He's like, yep. And they're like, well, we're going to get you with...
and he's like, I'm allowed to draw. God damn it.
Yeah. And they're like, well, damn it. He's right. So while ultimately the investigation into William's forged bills led to no convictions, and he was even allowed to like keep the money he made from it, because they're like, well, we can't take it back. I mean, they're like, you did it. You found the loophole. Good job, guy.
Yeah.
But he did not pass up on the opportunity to turn in his partner, Aubrey Price, who had been using that same printing equipment from Williams to counterfeit bank checks, which was illegal. So unfortunately for Mr. Price, there was a law in the books against that.
Oh, fuck. And this is why snitches have, since his time, have gotten stitches.
Stitches. He's the one that invented the need for snitches to be stitched.
To be stitched, yeah. Shut the fuck up. Quit fucking throwing people under the bus.
And here's the thing, and I didn't look into the conversions.
You were going to be off clean. Why the fuck you talking?
Well, he did get off clean, and he earned a sweet 200 British pounds for turning his partner in, which doesn't sound like a lot. Like I said, I didn't do the conversion.
But who gives a shit when you literally have made money? Like, legally have made your own money.
But this guy seems to not be able to help himself from making more and more and more enemy. Although Mr. Price was hung. So it's like, he's my enemy. Now he's dead.
To be fair, though, it's all building up for, like, there's not karma at play, because if there was such a thing as karma, this would have been over like years ago. But like there is like fate. And like there is
there'll be a nice aftertaste to karma here. So all good things must come to the end. The trail of victims that William had left in his wake, there were those that were caught and managed to like not be hung, like they got out of it either on technicalities or they got sentenced to jail time instead. So there were survivors that were still thrown under the bus by William. But more than that, there was like a whole virtual fucking army of widows of the wives of the men who were caught and hung, who knew exactly what the fuck happened. And so even though if you think, the guy that had all the dirt on me got, executed, it's like, yeah, his family's still around, dipshit. Like, have you not seen The Princess Bride? Inigo Montoya is going to come for you. And that made Newton's investigation rather easy. Isaac did finally formally charge William with 2 separate counts of counterfeiting. Each one in and of itself would be enough to have him hung. But this is probably Isaac being smart, and you see this in some of the like criminal proceedings today. He charged him twice because he charged him once with forging relatively modern coins that he had proven that he had made just in the last year. But he charged him the second time with forging French coins, which were what he had started with, like back at the beginning of all this. So you got kind of that double, like if he manages to slip out of one, you got the other one.
To hit him with,
yeah, and it still doesn't guarantee you'll get either of them, but it doubles your chances. But what more than doubles your chances is just like this constant parade of witnesses that were more than happy to testify against him in court. And also the fact that, again, this is the 1600s and it's the government that's prosecuting you. So basically, if the government wants you to be guilty, you're going to be guilty anyway. The point of that is to say
he was guilty as fuck. So
yeah, he didn't get a fair trial, but in the end it was fair because he was guilty. So it's one of those type of deals. But he was not getting off the charge, is what the whole point of that statement was.
It is interesting to me when like a criminal, like how a criminal sort of places themselves in their environment, and like like there are some criminals out there that like they kind of like they sort of merge with their community, and like their community kind of shuts up about them because they in a lot of ways they'll be an asset even though they're actually doing a lot of harm.
Especially if it's like those kind of like victimless crimes you hear them called a lot, which they're not, but they are. I mean, the people that you're hurting are. It's not like he was murdering prostitutes or selling drugs into the community or something. It was yeah.
So you're kind of this underworld factor, but you're also beneficial, or at least surface level. You're an asset to your environment, and then you got guys like this who just like they can't help themselves. Like they have to put a target on them, even if it's a long play like this. They have to find a way to like you said, make enemies out of people.
And I imagine what a lot of it was is this moved him because when he was born, like I said, his father was a weaver. They were as one of those classic born into poverty. Like they were not. It wasn't like his father was this like weaver for the court, the grand court, and they weaver. Had right. But he had managed to like con his way into high society. And I have to imagine that there were a lot of people in the government, in the police, whatever the equivalency of the police, the authorities that knew what he was doing. And he felt like, oh, but I'm one of the boys and this won't come back. They'll never come after me. But what always happens is that one, like the guy that was the nerd in school, which of course was fucking Isaac Newton. You get one guy that's like, no, this is wrong. And I don't care if people like you. My job is to prosecute you.
Eventually, somebody higher in the pecking order will overrule all those people you think you're cool with.
Right.
And like that is why putting yourself in a position where you've pissed off a lot of people in your world really bites you. Because if everybody like just kept their fucking mouth shut, you know, as much as Newton investigated, it's like without, you know, people able to testify and, you know, confirm all this shit, you know.
Yeah, and imagine like
that was probably 9/10 of like the evidence there, you know.
When his people got caught selling counterfeit, imagine instead of like throwing him under the bus, if he used his, because the whole point was what you would make a fake coin and you'd have somebody basically buy something, you know, get it into circulation, and then you sell that in exchange. You end up using your fake coin to get a real coin, and so it's not like you're sitting on a pile of counterfeit coins, because that's how you get caught.
Right.
The trick is sneaking them into circulation in exchange for real coins. So imagine if his like technique was, oh fuck, this guy that works for me got caught, but I'm gonna like bribe the officials to let him out, because you know that would work back then. Then you make a lot of strong allies, but instead he's like, I don't know what he's talking about. I don't need that guy. And it came back to bite him. Although I kind of imagine all it really did, like I said, was made Isaac Newton's investigation into him really fucking easy. But I imagine Isaac would have probably got him one way or the other anyway.
Unless he made a fake Isaac Newton to fight Isaac Newton.
Which one's the real one? The king's like, I can't tell. Yeah. Kill them both. And now we don't have gravity. Today we're floating around like fucking idiots because we never invented the apple falling from the tree or whatever. I think that's how it worked.
Yeah.
I was kind of sleeping that day at school, but so during the trial, William attempted to like feign madness, basically the insanity, like I don't know what to do, you know, it's chicken o'clock. I'm crazy.
It will be refreshing when we do a story about a criminal on this show that like it just ends with their trial being like, yeah, I'm fucked.
Yeah, I did it. You got
Instead
me.
of like, no, I'm crazy.
Crazy. He also like they had a whole fucking parade of witnesses, and every single one he viciously like attacked, not physically, but like, you're a fucking liar. You don't know. You're just out to get me and blah, blah, blah. You know, that type of thing. Behind the scenes, when he wasn't in court, he wrote letters to officials, the judge, Isaac Newton, basically anybody he could. You know, some of the letters he'd beg for leniency, and when that wouldn't work, he'd threaten their lives. And shockingly, that didn't work either, because it's not a real great defense strategy to be like, look, if you find me guilty, I'll fucking kill you.
Throw fucking fake coins at you until eventually you die.
The whole world will burn in fake groats. You thought you were done with the groat, but I'll bring it back, yeah. So shockingly, none of his tactics work, and William...
A threatening letter that's like titled like, you'll never be done with the groat.
The groats. So William Chandler was sentenced to death, and he was hung on March 22nd, 1699. So that's part of this, he at the beginning of the trial, like I said, he was feigning madness. Some accounts say like by the end of the trial, he seemed like he probably did kind of have a mental breakdown because he realized he was fucked. Yeah. But it's one of those mental breakdowns
but that's
that you
not
don't
insanity.
really. No, that's like I said, you don't feel sorry for him, or you don't say you shouldn't convict him. That's because that's just somebody going, "Oh shit, I got caught. I don't know what to do." It's like, well,
that's just a criminal whose world is falling apart. It happens.
But that adds to the karma flavor of it, though, is that it again, we've talked about this many, many times. Given the number of people that he kind of abused and hurt and got killed just for personal gain. And again, you know, they were criminals too, but that doesn't make it okay to just like be like, they're expendable and I'll just keep using them and they'll get hung and I'll replace it, you know, that kind of thing. So there are various levels of criminality. So, and we've talked about it. So you never get that completely satisfying karma because it's like, yeah, he was hung. And it's like, yeah, but nothing that they could have done to him really matches the amount of pain that he put into the world. But knowing that like he did see his end coming and like had that, at least that time period through the trial to just like lose it. It's like, yeah, at least that's, you know, it wasn't like one of these guys that just like one day a common street tough shot him in the head in a robbery. It's like, well, that's not really like, I guess it's technically karma, but it's not comeuppance.
But that would be great. I think that's somewhere our culture is just different now, though, where it's like, it's why movies and stuff like a disappointing ending is when the bad criminal gets, taken to justice and fucking, even if there's capital punishment involved, it's like, it's still sort of this, it's not dramatic. Even
it's like a swift and not, it never reaches the level.
And that's the whole idea of the justice system in theory, is that it's not supposed to be emotional or whatever. But when it comes to guys like this and stories like this, we as people want the theatrical.
Right. Yeah. It's the difference between, I'm not going to lobby and say, oh, he should have been tortured slowly for 10 years before they killed him. I'm not going to honestly lobby for that. But yeah, like you said, when you're reading the story and you want justice, it's like, could have been justice-ier. Like I taste some justice in there, but like if you added some salt, it really brings the justice.
I'm just saying,
out.
If Tarantino directed this story, it wouldn't fight. Those women would have beat the shit out of this guy. All those widows would have fucked him up.
Now, the interesting thing is, and you kind of said something that seemed like you're alluding to it. When I hear this story and you go through his life, you picture this guy that, grew up and he got into this criminal enterprise and became this like con man, like basically like mob boss or whatever, focusing in forged coins, but a lot of other stuff too. And then he lived his life. And then as he was like the Dawn, his sunset years, he got caught and put to death. But if he was executed in 1699, like the oldest he could have been would have been like early 50s. They don't know exactly when he was born. So it's not like he necessarily lived out to retirement age and then got caught. 50 is not young, but it's not old
it is kind of like a mob boss sort of thing is a good analogy to it, because, it's like it's that total Godfather sort of thing where it's like, we're doing all this dirty shit, but I swear one day we'll go legit, and then like it's right around when he's trying to go legit that's the arc, if you're thinking about it in terms of like a movie or a story. It's like that's the turning point, is when that attempt to go legit fails, where everything else starts seeming to fall apart in this whole operation. And
it feels like a lot of times
movie has those points.
But a lot of times it feels like you hit that point, and in real life, it happens too. But you look at what was his name, Whitey Bulger. Mm-hmm. It's like, he got caught and brought to justice, but he was like 80 when they caught him. So it's not like you're saying, like, we're gonna take the last like 3 years of your life away from you. 50s, that's still a pretty good chunk of your life you're being shorted. Although, plenty of these criminals don't make it out of their like 20s and 30s either. Yeah. But
another example, like the Goodfellas guys who were, who those characters were based on, a lot of them who ended up going to jail were like, they were fucking old and unhealthy by the time they went to jail anyway.
Yeah. So, and that's what I mean. And it kind of takes away that, like, that closure, that sense of like, justice. Cause it's like, well, they didn't have to really you're always sacrificing for you. I wouldn't want to give up a single year of my life, but there is kind of this like value difference of giving up when you're already on the decline and you're dying anyway, versus like these people that they got killed in their 20s that never got to live the prime of their life. That's what I mean. You'll never get that like one-on-one.
But that's the difference though, of like, are you trying to like actually, like the justice system isn't some one-to-one thing. Well, it's not supposed to be. It's, what it actually is these days is kind of, I'll leave that up for you to decide.
That could be a whole different political show for us.
Yeah, but in theory, the idea is that it's not your tool for vengeance. It doesn't make good on what happened to the victims. The whole idea is like taking an individual who is damaging society and removing him from it. And what that
and also like. This ridiculous idea that it's a deterrent, and on some level, there's things that I wouldn't do because it's like I don't want to go to jail, but most of them I wouldn't do because morally I don't agree to them anyway.
Most of the things I want to do because you could go to jail for them. And I think that's really cool.
Cool. Yeah, my argument would be they're like, oh, it's a deterrent. And so I think most criminals, though, think that they'll never get caught. And there's a percentage of them that don't care if they get caught. Like, I don't think it's as great of a deterrent as
I don't think a lot of criminals, they're not as forward thinking like that. Though.
Well,
it's not long-term planning. So I don't totally agree with that because I think a lot of them kind of are. I do think there's a success level, like we've kind of talked about today, where like guys get so big that they think they can kind of buy their legitimacy and be isolated from what they did in the past to get there. But I think there's a lot of guys, more small-time criminals who are like, yeah, I might go to jail, I might not, but in the meantime, this makes money, and I'm going to keep doing it. And those guys are what we call in the rap game real ones.
But the point remains that makes it not a deterrent. The prison itself isn't keeping them because, like you said, they don't care if they. I don't want to say they don't care because most of them don't want to go to jail. It just doesn't stop them.
But it doesn't stop them. And then this goes into an even bigger conversation about crime and poverty and how those are inextricably linked.
Yes.
Like you can't. Why wouldn't jail be a deterrent? Well, maybe because a lot of fucking criminals don't have other options. So that's their economic way forward. And there are exceptions. There are people who are just like, yeah, I want a shortcut. But a lot of them are literally born into circumstances where they don't have a choice. So the moral here is that even in a situation, even in most criminal situations, it's society's fault.
Right.
So, yeah.
Anyway, I was gonna say let's hit stop and start again, and join us here in just a second for a 2-hour special on the United States criminal justice system.
Two white guys discuss criminality and poverty.
Two white guys who have never been to jail discuss what it means.
Two very, 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 very white guys talk about societal issues.
Look, I think we know better than anybody what the needs of this group or that group of Americans are. We're white guys. We know what's up.
We are very thoughtful white people. Speaking on behalf of all the people who could easily just have the platform, but we insist. We bought these Blue Yeti mics, so we must talk into them.
I was gonna say, isn't that the honest stance of a lot of these kind of shows? So, and I don't want to say we're not like, oh, we're above it because we're better than that, but it's like, hey, look, we're two guys that have no way are qualified to talk about this, but listen to us instead of all the other shows that have qualified people on them.
Welcome to White Boy Power Preachy Hour.
I think we'd attract the wrong crowd there. So.
I mean, it would be. There's no right crowd for a show like that. It's a bad show. That's my point.
I was thinking about more like the White Knight podcast, not the White Power group. Like I wouldn't want to be.
It's not White Power, but
yeah, like the White Saviors. Like we know what society needs.
Yeah. Well, there's I would argue 99% of podcasts are that show.
Oh yeah, probably. Which is why we pick such a
I would lump us into that because we get preachy on here.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's why we pick such a harmless topic as anything, literally.
So we can, because if you stick to one thing too long, this happens. This exact episode happens. So anyway, that's this episode.
We're gonna join us next week when we solve the housing crisis.
Yeah. Vote for us.